midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Tom Kaeding. He is the Chief Financial Officer at Wunderkind. Tom, thanks so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thank you, Christina. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for having me. So I'm Tom Kaeding, pronouns are he, him, his. And it's an interesting question. I was actually discussing it with a friend the other day, and I don't have an early recollection of what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Okay.
I think the one that I can remember at its earliest was when I was a preteen. I really wanted to be a lawyer. I think it's at that point in time, I still to this day, I enjoy just discussing different topics and taking any different side and trying to understand all perspectives. And so I think that was always what I had leaned toward until when I got to school and looked at the amount of investment that was involved in becoming a lawyer, has kind of shied me away from it. But that was definitely my earliest career.
That definitely resonates with me as a former mock trial kid. And I see all my friends who are lawyers now doing an immense amount of investment and work into that as well. If you fast forward to now, you are the Chief Financial Officer at Wunderkind. At the time of this recording, you are our first CFO on the show. How do you think your personal journey has really led you up until this point?
I've been very fortunate that I think one of the challenging things, at least for me, and I imagine a lot of, especially younger people feel this way, is you're expected to know what you want to do, and you have to make a decision when you're 18, figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. And I went through a series of, I feel like the usual is like, is it doctor, engineer, lawyer? And I kind of went through all of those. None of them felt like a good fit. Doctor, I'm squeamish, had no interest in that. Engineering, ironically, I am not good at math. And lawyer, again, kind of looked into the investment that it would take to get there and ultimately decided it wasn't for me. So I started focusing in on going into business. And I found it really fascinating, especially the idea of entrepreneurship. Also found too that I'm not an entrepreneur, but I found I really resonated with me was using numbers to help articulate a story. When I think about being a chief financial officer, the thing that I get most excited about is finding quantifiable ways to help support a position on something that like, hey, this is an area of opportunity, or hey, this is an upcoming challenge. And I've said this to many people, and it's always going to sound corny, but I almost look at it as the matrix, where there's numbers all around you. And so taking those numbers and conveying them in a way that you can help people understand different things that could be a priority for your business is what I really enjoy about my role. When I started off in financial services, I think pretty early on, I figured out that it wasn't a career or a job that I particularly felt spoke to me. It was something that at first it was great and I learned a ton. But as I started looking further down the line, I didn't think it would provide me the opportunities on some of the other muscles and skill sets that I would like to flex. So I knew I wanted to go into a fast-paced, early-stage company, somewhere where you can add impact, not just in your specialty, but really when I think about the role of finance at a fast-growing company, it's really partnering throughout the organization and helping people who are experts in a specific subject matter. And again, helping quantify some of those things and thinking through opportunities and challenges. And so layering in that skill set, but also getting to learn from all the people that I work with is something that I find very fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. Working with different parts of the business, and you kind of talked about storytelling through numbers and metrics, and working in kind of a high growth time period in a company as well. And I do want to talk about, from your perspective, what do you think the CFO's role is in, the company culture and, really fostering that environment?
It's a great question. And I think as you start speaking to more CFOs, I'm sure there's a ton of different takes, because I think the roles really evolved over time. I think historically, the CFO has been more seen as a bean counter, or the bad guy who's there to tell you that, hey, you can't do all these things.
Yeah.
Exactly. And hey, we need to cut costs and all of the things of that nature. But what's happening now is evolved from, hey, how do we just cut costs and focus on the bottom line, to how do we create the most long-term value? So when I think about the role of a CFO, it is helping with the prioritization, especially for an early stage company. You're always going to be restrained by both human capital and also just financial capital. And you're always going to be restrained. And so to identify all of the different avenues and initiatives that you can pursue and help people think through and prioritize what is going to be the largest long-term value impact is really where I see that. It's a counterpart to a lot of the business stakeholders on, okay, if we can do 5 things, what should those 5 things be? And a lot of people have a very good sense and a gut feel, or I know that this will work, but helping that turn that into something that is objective, financially backed, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you are making risk-adjusted decisions constantly. And so to help people think through those and finding a way to evaluate, how do you evaluate, hey, we should add this new team or bring on a software, or we could open up a new office internationally, right? They're all 3 very, or we can launch new products. They're all very different things. So finding a common language through numbers would be where you can actually evaluate the pros and cons of each and make an appropriate decision.
I like that phrase, risk adjusted decision as well. We always talk about here like priorities. If everything is a priority, then really nothing is a priority, and you're just skimming the surface of all of your items and what your focus area is too. And the other part of what you said in terms of long-term strategy for the business, long-term strategy for your team, human capital, what you were talking about as well. I know, through reading about Wunderkind and talking to other leaders of the business as well, that inclusion is a really important piece of your strategy, which is really great. We're seeing more companies really put a focus on this as well. In your experience, what is really important to ensure all employees at the company feel like they are truly part of the culture and that they belong and can do their best work?
Absolutely. It's a great question. It's one I'm very passionate about. And I realize I didn't layer in the role of the CFO as it relates to culture too. So I'll start there and then I'll answer that. I get excited and I start talking. And
no, I love it.
Well, one of the big things that has been really fascinating for me is I think about an organization really in 2 buckets. You have organizational intelligence and you have organizational health. And so many companies weight everything on organizational intelligence. How do we bring in the smartest people who have the best ideas and raise enough capital that we can be the most efficient and create the best product, et cetera? People don't focus in on organizational health, which is, to me, is how do you create a culture and an environment where people feel fulfilled at work? There's something that they're excited about, right? It's something that when they want to refer other people to come in and join them, it's something that they have communities throughout the organization and it's comfortable. They feel that they understand what the organization's vision and objective is, understands what their role is and how it contributes to that. And it's something that I don't think people focus on because it seems so simple, but it's actually a way more complex part of the organization because human beings are inherently complex. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about that, which I think ties into some of the other pieces about creating an inclusive environment, I think, again, to create an environment where people, what I try to do every single day is enable people to add the most value they possibly can. That can come in a lot of ways, like how do you remove inefficiencies in the job or things that are painful for them to do? How can we better be transparent about what is happening with the business, where the business is going, and what that means for everyone? How can I better communicate the vision on what we're looking to accomplish, and specifically how every part of the organization ties into that? And I think by having that level of communication and transparency and visibility, and also I think an important part is creating a inclusive and a comfortable space for everyone to come operate in, where one of the big things that we're focusing on now is performance acceleration, which is what we're looking at as mentorship for the entire organization and almost that career coaching progressively as you're here. We spend so much time and effort and resources in bringing on incredible people. So why would we stop there? We want to continue investing in those people, and as they continue to grow on their personal journeys, the business continues to grow, finding opportunities and areas for them to continue to grow with us. And that's something that's extremely important. As it relates to creating an inclusive environment and DEI and strategy around that, I've been so impressed with the people that we have here with the employee resource groups. And now we've just launched employee impact groups on the communities that they've built. I'm fortunate to be a member of a few of them, and just seeing how important it is for people to have communities of like-minded people, or people where they can just discuss things that are going on with them. It may relate professionally. It may also just be something that's personal, and feeling that you have those advocates, allies, people that are similar to you is so helpful to creating a more fulfilled and happy employee base. And one of the things I love that's happening now is DEI is no longer just some, okay, check the box. We hit our quota, we did this thing. People are holding companies accountable, and it's a beautiful thing. People are talking about how competitive it is in from a talent perspective to bring on and retain employees. And it's because people understand that it's not a one-way street. You don't owe the organization things unilaterally. The organization owes a lot to you. And it's not enough to get a ping pong table and we have beer on tap. Like, those are just small little things that don't actually drive the difference, but it's like, how do you foster an environment that people are excited about and they want to be? And if they're not given those opportunities, or they're not finding that fulfillment, then they're going to go elsewhere. So I think it's great that people are holding companies accountable.
Absolutely. I think it's great that people are holding companies accountable. There are a lot of opportunities out there as well, and people want to be fulfilled in the work that they're doing too, something that you brought up too. I want to kind of dig in on organizational health as well. So, one of the pillars that we talked about too, and you mentioned employee impact groups and employee resource groups, and making sure that systems are scaling so people can ultimately do efficient work and things of that nature. But how do you know when an organization is quote unquote healthy, unhealthy, or a work in progress? Understanding that, again, we're not checking any boxes, but is it the presence of these employee resource groups? Is it checking in on folks? What does that look like on your end in terms of measuring that success?
It's funny because it can be difficult. You know, in your gut, right? When you're
Yeah,
walking around an office, which I guess gets a little bit harder virtually, but like, what is the overall sentiment?
right.
Things that are really important are going to be, we do engagement surveys, and we will continually ask similar series of questions. And so you can see how things are trending over time and how is that overall sentiment. And the important piece there is to make sure that you're setting a baseline, and then B, that as those things are happening, you are communicating back to the organization is like, hey, we hear you on these things. Here are things that we may be doing well that we want to do more of. Here are areas of opportunity that we want to do better. And so I think by talking and giving people a forum to express some of those, and again, in a way that they feel is safe, and you're not just going to get canned answers, but I actually want to know how you feel. And one of the things that's important to me is that, work can take up a large portion of people's time and lives, but it should not be the only thing. It should be a small bucket of things that you are passionate about that are going on in your life. And so what we can do is something that's going to be a necessity where people need jobs, income, et cetera. Let's just make that the best experience that we possibly can. And what I look for is, are there metrics beyond just doing engagement surveys that you can determine that overall health and have also aspirational goals toward? And my favorite one is looking at how many new employees are referred by a current employee, because my perspective there is it captures a lot, because you're not going to refer people to come work with you if you don't find it is a good culture or an exciting opportunity or something that people would come to give are able to drive value, right? So when I look at that, it's something where we can aspirationally set targets. We want 40% of our hires next year to be internally referred by someone else. And that organic referral, not just something where it's like, hey, you have to go do this, but we want to start seeing that trend in a direction where people are excited about the organization, what we're doing. They feel that they have advocates, allies, friends, they have coaching and mentorship, and they're able to continue learning and growing as professionals. And they're excited about all those things. And so they're bringing more people to join the organization. And I think that's just a good scoreboard, or at least one that we focus on internally.
Mm-hmm. I think that definitely makes sense. And like looking at the areas where you want to improve, I think the kind of foundation of acknowledging where you are, where you want to be aspirationally, I think that mentality makes sense for the direction of the company. I know we were talking about, Wunderkind strategy overall, but as chief financial officer and someone on the executive and leadership team, how do you think about being an effective manager or leader? Can you provide any kind of examples where you're just thinking, you're internally checking in, or you ask your team for feedback? What does that look like to see, I am doing my best work?
Yeah, the I think one of the big parts there, and it's also very challenging, especially when you're in a very fluid environment and priorities are constantly shifting, but looking to set appropriate expectations, goals, and here's what we want to accomplish with people that I work with directly or even with the organization as a whole. So that way you at least know if we're trending in the right direction. And it's not to say those things won't change or shift, but something that I've seen is you're dealing with someone who you feel like that we could get more out of them. Their potential is higher, and trying to express that without having that clear expectation setting from the beginning on like, here are the things that we'd like to work on together and partner together can be a big challenge. And so when I think about my role as a manager or a leader, I think the biggest thing is just leading with compassion and empathy. I am someone that when I am working with people, I really look at it as a partnership. And even the word employee makes it sound like overly cold. We kind of call it Wunderkinds internally, which is helpful. But by being there as a resource, and I want to enable you and let you run with the things that you're passionate about and you're driving toward. If there are areas where you feel like you're hitting roadblocks and I can be helpful, that's where I would love to have you loop me in. I don't want to be there sitting dictating everything that you do. It's if I can explain clearly, here is what we're looking for from an outcome perspective, and whatever you find is the best way to get there is completely fine with me, right? It's what we're looking for is focusing on outcomes. And what I have really enjoyed about my experience here, and I think anyone who's worked at a fast growing tech company may feel the same, is there's a high level of autonomy. And so if you can clearly define, hey, what does success look like for this initiative, for this year, whatever it may, for this role, and then give people the autonomy that they can go create that value, whatever makes the most sense to them. That's what fosters a lot of innovation and creativity in the way that we're doing things. Mm-hmm. Something that is important too is when people are starting is checking in with them and giving them the opportunity to voice opinions early on. It doesn't matter to me if it's your first job and you're a week here. If something doesn't make sense to you, you're like, why do we do things this way? It's like, I would love to hear what are ideas and ways we could do it better. Because like so many times you like do something and you plan it for, hey, this works at a scale of 50 people, but now that we're 700, does that really still work? But you kind of put things aside and you just keep moving. And so I think at bringing on new people and giving them the opportunity to contribute and doing that in a way that is, I value your opinion. And it doesn't matter what your background is, and it doesn't matter if you're early in your career, if you're late in your career, I want to hear all of it. And if we can better have a conversation on our perspectives and one that's very open and transparent with one another, then we can ultimately find better outcomes.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking of adding additional people, I know that your team is continuing to grow and there's more folks who are interested in coming to join the Wunderkind, workplace as well. And you mentioned autonomy. I love working in startups and high growth environments because you have the autonomy to create. Ideas can come from anywhere, like you were saying too. What is the hardest part about scaling though? Because you're implementing all these processes, potentially more steps, and you're trying to make things more efficient while including people and still providing that kind of innovative environment. But from your perspective, what has been kind of a challenging part of scaling?
There's really twofold. I think the first one is someone gave the analogy that you're fueling a plane while you're flying it. And some of those things can be a challenge where, hey, we put this thing in place. We know that it worked for this set amount of period of time, but it's not going to scale with the organization. So trying to, whether it be a technology or a process or the way that we've structured a team, and you're trying to adjust that to get it in a world that does scale, but you still have to service it as it exists. So it's kind of that's probably the most challenging part is, the areas that are bursting at the seams, right? It's just, if you could just pause the business for 6 months and go implement a bunch of structures that are going to scale, that are based off best practices, it's like, it would be great and you can do it. So I think finding ways that around the edges you can continually improve is going to be the biggest thing. And for me as a finance leader, a huge component of that is analyzing and understanding data so that you can have a further outlook on like, okay, where are things heading and where we're going to have pressure, where there are going to be opportunities. The earlier you can decide on that, the earlier you start influencing those changes. And so it's not just anytime you have, this is a disaster, it's on fire, we need to just rip it out and replace it with something, it's going to go poorly. So I think that is a big challenge as you scale any organization. I think particularly as it relates to ours, it's prioritization. There's so many great ideas and things that we want to do in areas we want to take our technology and our business, and they're all extremely exciting and can all add a ton of value. But if you try to do 50 things, you're not going to do any of them well. It's finding, okay, what is the order of operations on, like, we can do 5 things this quarter. What are those 5 things that we should really focus on and do? And that I think is the biggest challenge, because what you don't want, and it actually ties back into organizational health, is constant context shifting. Hey, this is the biggest priority. We're going to spend all of our engineering resources on building this feature, this product. Mm-hmm. And then 3 months in, it's like, actually drop everything you're doing. It's now this thing. And people are putting a lot of time, effort, and are passionate about things that they're creating. Right. And so if you're constantly shifting things on them, and you never get to take things to completion, it's a very disheartening thing. And so I think having prioritization, and you don't have to stick to it indefinitely, right? Things can change around the edges, but what we want to be is 90% confident that over the next 6 months, here are going to be the key initiatives that we're undertaking. And if we could be 90% confident on that, and it allows us to be flexible as, hey, we're panning something out, and the other thing is, if you set things proactively and you measure things appropriately, if something's not working, it doesn't mean to continue doing it on that path, but it's at least communicating to people as those things are happening is something that's like critically important.
Let's talk about what the order of operations is in your kind of brain right now. I love asking people this question. What's the next problem or situation you're currently trying to solve? The most brain space is going towards this.
Yeah, it's when you operate at an org-wide level, everything feels like a circular reference. And so it's interesting that when you try to identify root causes, but again, the business is continuing to grow, it can be a very, very challenging environment. Our biggest thing right now is the company is growing north of 40% year over year. It's looking that it's going to continue accelerating on that growth profile. Bringing in people and sequentially in the right order is something that is a huge focus. It's not just do we need the support and the people, but the order in which you bring people in is going to be really important. If you're going to launch a new product, you need to build a sales team or commercial function and customer success team to help service, implement, sell that product. And you hire all the commercial folks first and not the engineers, and that product doesn't get delivered, then you obviously have a problem where you just hired an entire team of people who aren't able to do their jobs because something doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it can be a constant challenge of if we have a recruiting team of 15 people and they can each hire 10 people in a quarter, what are the next 150 hires that we need to make? And how do we make sure that it's happening in sync with the rest of the organization so that we don't end up with 100 new salespeople, but we didn't bring in any engineers for them to have products to sell to our customer base?
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about that when, expanding the finance team as well? I think you've been in the company for over 5 years now. Is that right?
That's right.
Were you the first finance hire, or was there already a team in place?
The first hire. I left financial services because I wanted to get away from finance and took a role that was operations. And then within 6 months, it was like, actually, we just need this to be finance.
Remember who your first hire was when you were expanding the team? Like what kind of role you needed in that time?
Yeah, there's been a lot of them. I do remember the first person that I've hired. I think something that, especially as the organization continues to scale, you can't have a lot of key persons throughout the organization, right? If there's a single point of failure anywhere, it's going to be a problem. And it happens for early stage companies. You have people that are going to do a little bit of everything, and they're so instrumental on their historic knowledge of how things are done, et cetera. But as you continue to scale, one of the things that I think is most important that any leader should focus on is that if you were to leave, the organization shouldn't be impacted in a dramatic fashion, right? It's obviously going to be painful. There's some transition period, et cetera. But finding the areas, okay, what am I doing that's driving the most value for the organization? And can I bring in people that can help me do that at a larger scale? And the earlier that you do that and you give those people the opportunities to continue growing with the organization, the better off that you're going to be. Mm-hmm. And then there's obviously things that come up where when I started, there really wasn't an accounting function. And for it's going to be, if you don't, there's always a saying in finance, it's like garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't actually have numbers that you can believe or data that you can trust or data that scales, everything that you're doing is just not going to be effective because you're operating with bad information. And so then there's things that like are just best practice as the organization scales. When you start bringing in people to focus on AR and AP and collections, when you start looking at forecasting on an annual basis, what is that when it goes to 3 years? How do you have people? Our operations team is something that's interesting too, because we look at it as like a team of internal management consultants that can manage cross-departmental projects that don't have a natural owner. And so as more of those things happen, can you find someone that can oversee a team of people that can really make sure that we're moving all the initiatives in the same direction and that they are going in line with what the original intent had been?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about architecting a team, architecting the entire Wunderkind team, bringing them on at the right point in time, talking about company culture and organizational health, which is really important, and just redesigning company culture in general over the past 2 years. But I do have a more broad question for you around when was your last learning moment?
I am learning honestly all the time. And I know that's a cop-out answer.
That's okay.
it's honestly every day, and likely in most of the meetings that I'm in, there's new areas that I'm learning about. And something that's been interesting for me is when I originally took the role, I didn't have like some natural passion for marketing. And over time, as I better understand what we are looking to accomplish and what does it mean to create a better shopping experience, it's something that I am now very passionate in. So earlier today, we were in kind of a future vision product strategy meeting, and some of the things that we're looking to build, it's interesting because once someone says them to you, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that makes so much sense.
Clicks.
But without someone kind of steering that conversation, I never would have thought of it organically. And so I think the stuff that I'm really excited about and learning about continually would be how can we create better shopping experiences? Like, what do consumers actually desire from the brands that they relate with? And everything that really goes into that is something that I find very fascinating.
That's interesting. And also it's a fun kind of trajectory to get more into something that you develop passion with over time, especially for the mission of the organization on a whole, not necessarily at Wunderkind, but just out in the world, what you're seeing in the news, other companies. Are there any common mistakes you're seeing chief financial officers make that you would say is a cautionary tale or anything like that?
Something I think a lot of CFOs and finance professionals at large get wrong is not investing enough in people, and specifically in employee growth. It's something that may not have as quantifiable of a return in the near term, but we talked about it earlier. Organizational health and having an excited, a passionate, a fulfilled workplace, and one where people see the value they can create, is going to yield way more long-term value than some of those quicker near-term decisions and investments that are a little bit more visible from a numbers perspective.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, sharing the insight there, and just like where we are today in the market is very unique. So I think that is helpful. I also read in your bio that you enjoy things outside of work like poetry and skateboarding and music. So I do have a question around, do you have a favorite poem or author that you would recommend to folks who are listening?
I do. I love Derek Brown. Okay. He's a contemporary poet. I find it's very thoughtful, but also very amusing and fun in a lot of cases. My favorite poem by him is called 300 Bones. Okay. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I had a friend paint a picture for me that sits in my apartment on their just interpretation of what it meant. But I think it's beautiful, and his ability to capture a lot of human emotion, but do it in a way that's fun and clever, is really impressive. So definitely check out Derek Brown if you are interested in poetry, or even if you're not.
Wow. I'm very impressed that you had like an answer right off the bat for a specific poem and a specific author as well.
Yeah, I love his work, and that was one that I remember the first time I read it. The whole time I just had chills, and it was something that always stuck with me. And so it's something that I continually will read every few months or so.
Very nice. I love that. I love spoken word poetry as well. So I definitely have to check him and his work out too. Tom, is there anything that I didn't ask you in our interview that you want to share with our listeners, or maybe one key takeaway that you want to bold, underscore, capitalize, for our listeners listening?
Yeah, I think overall, things that really excite me that are happening right now, again, is this accountability that people are holding their organizations to. And I would just encourage everyone to continue finding environments where you feel valued. There's so many opportunities that are out there where if you feel that you're in one where you're not appreciated, go take a look. There are a lot of companies that are doing very exciting and interesting things, and it's now on the organizations to drive real value and not just the little perks and the random knickknacks and things that you can find around the office, but really finding a place where you feel that they're investing in your growth and that you're given opportunities to drive value. I think that is something that I would encourage everyone to do. We're going to spend too much of our lives at work for you to not feel valued and fulfilled and that you're growing in that place. So that would be my biggest takeaway for any of the listeners.
I think that's a good call to action to end on as well, making sure you're feeling valued in the spaces. And there are spaces out there where you can feel valued if you're not getting that from your current workplace. And we're going to spend, I think the stat is a third of our life working, which is definitely interesting. So you might as well enjoy some parts of it.
Exactly. Yeah. No one, I don't know. Sometimes I annoy my friends because I actually I actually really like my job. But no one's going to like it all the time. But there should be a greater benefit and you feel better about it than it is more of a pain or a nuisance to your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Reimagining Company Culture. I enjoyed our conversation here today.
Thank you so much, Christina, for having me.
Yeah, of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.